I've carried this story in silence for longer than most people have been alive. Time has done its best to bury it, to blur the edges, to soften the blow, but some memories never fade. Some wounds, even after a lifetime, remain as raw as the day they were made. I was just a boy when the world I knew disappeared with the sound of heavy boots, and the scream my mother never got to finish. I've lived through slavery, through freedom that came too late, through years of pretending I was whole. But in truth, a piece of me was taken the day they took her. And though I've never seen her again, I still remember her final look, eyes filled with love, fear, and something I didn't understand then. Now, I do. She was saying goodbye today. With this old voice of mine, I want to tell you what happened, not to seek pity, but so our memory doesn't vanish. If you've ever loved and lost, stay with me. There are truths in this story that need to be heard. I was no more than 5 years old when the day came that would split my life into two. The time before they took her, and everything after. I remember the way the sunlight fell through the cracks in the wooden boards of the quarters that morning, catching the dust in the air like little golden fireflies. My mother had braided my hair the night before, and as I sat on the floor beside her feet, planning with a small piece of cloth she had sewn into a makeshift doll, I remember feeling something. I didn't yet have a name for peace. That kind of peace only children feel before they understand what the world can do to them. She hummed a tune softly, a melody I would carry in my soul for the rest of my life. Her voice was gentle, almost like a whisper, but there was always a strength behind it, the kind that held me together more than I ever knew at the time. We had no clocks, but we knew the rhythms of the day. When the voices outside grew louder, and the earth trembled slightly with the weight of hooves and boots, something in the air changed. Even before the door flew open, I felt her body stiffen. Beside me, I looked up at her. Confused, she didn't speak. She just pressed my face to her chest and held me tighter than she ever had before. Then the shouting came. I remember the voices, rough, commanding, unfamiliar. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the fear in them. One of the men pointed at her, and though I couldn't grasp why, I knew he was claiming her. My mother didn't beg. She didn't scream. She stood up slowly, like she had done this in her mind 1,000 times before, and looked him straight in the eye. Her hands trembled, but her chin did not fall. She didn't even look at me at first, maybe because she knew if she did, she wouldn't be able to go through with it. They told her to move faster. She turned toward me and knelt down, and I think in that instant she tried to memorize my face the way I have spent my life, trying to hold on to hers. She touched my cheek, and her fingers felt colder than usual. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Maybe there were too many words, and none of them would do. Or maybe she knew that sound would only make it worse. I watched her stand again and walk toward the door, where the man waited, but before she crossed the threshold, she turned her head and looked at me one last time. That look, I've never let go of it. It was everything: love, pain, helplessness, hope, fear. It was the look of a mother trying to burn the image of her child into her memory, even as she was being torn away. And in that look, I saw a truth that I would only understand many years later. She knew she would never come back. That moment froze time. I didn't cry, not then. I think I was too young to understand fully what was happening, and yet old enough to feel the world shatter in a way that would never be made whole again. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was loud, deafening. It was the sound of something sacred being broken. I waited, staring at that door for what felt like hours, maybe days. Every time it creaked or someone passed by, I hoped it would be her, but she never returned. That little cloth doll lay beside me, and I picked it up and hugged it the way she used to hold me. I didn't know then that it would become the only thing I had left of her as the days passed. No one told me where she had gone. The other women tried to comfort me, but their eyes said what their mouths couldn't. They had seen it before. They had lost, too. We all lived in a place where goodbyes came without warning, where love could be stolen in a moment, where children had to grow up not with time, but with trauma. I stopped speaking much after that. I would sit by the door for hours, hoping I had just misunderstood, that maybe she had gone to the river or to fetch something and would be back smiling like always. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered the truth, and though I was just a boy, I listened. I started dreaming of her at night, trying to replay that final look over and over so I wouldn't forget. I tried to hear her voice, her song, her laugh, but memory is a fragile thing when you're young, and pain does strange things to it. Still, I held on. I had to, because in a place where nothing belonged to us, not even our own names, memories were all we had. That day marked the end of my childhood. I became older not because time passed, but because sorrow aged me. I stopped being the little boy with the doll and became a child of silence, of watchfulness, of longing. I never spoke her name aloud again, not because I forgot it, but because I feared the sound of it might make my chest collapse. I began to understand things I shouldn't have needed to know. At that age, I understood that we were not safe, that the people who claimed to own us could take anything at any moment. That love made you vulnerable in a world that punished it. But still, I loved her, and I kept that love alive in secret, like a flicker of light in a place that wanted only darkness. People say children forget. I didn't. I never could. That moment, that final look, it became the lens through which I saw everything else in life. And though it hurt, it also gave me strength, because even in her last moment, my mother gave me something no one else ever could, the courage to remember. After they took my mother, the days blurred into one another like colors smeared on the wet canvas. No lines, no shape, no sense of time. I don't remember the first night without her. I only remember waking up and reaching for her hand and finding nothing but rough fabric and cold air. I was still small, still clumsy, still carrying the hope that maybe someone had made a mistake and she'd come back, but she didn't. And I learned that in that place, the ones who disappeared rarely return. That's when the silence began to grow inside me. Not the kind you choose, but the kind that grows roots and wraps around your words until you forget how to speak your truth. I was raised by absence, by glances from other women who had lost their own children, by quiet meals eaten in fear, by nights when the wind outside seemed to cry louder than I could. I still had a body like a child, but my spirit had been made old. There was no space for questions, no answers if you dared to ask. The adults moved carefully, spoke softly, as if the air itself might betray them. I started to mimic their movements. I stopped planning, stopped laughing, stopped calling for her, not because I stopped missing her, but because I realized that in that world, grief was a luxury we couldn't afford to show. I tried to be invisible. If I wasn't seen, maybe I wouldn't be taken too. The chains they used weren't always iron. Some were made of fear, of silence, of hunger, of being told every day that your life didn't belong to you. I didn't know what freedom meant, but I knew I didn't have it. I could feel it missing, like a limb that had been cut away before I was even born. I worked in the field when I was barely tall enough to hold the tools properly. My hands blistered, my back bent, and the overseer's eyes followed me like a hawk. He didn't speak to me like a person. He spoke to me like I was part of the land, something to use and break and leave behind. Sometimes I'd hear other children crying softly in the dark, their voices muffled under the weight of their own sorrow. None of us said much. We just existed in the same space, breathing the same air, learning the same lessons. Don't look too long. Don't talk too loud. Don't hope too much. I tried to remember my mother's face, but over time, even that became harder. It scared me, how memories can slip away when you need them most. I'd lie awake some nights, whispering her name into the darkness, as if the wind might carry it to wherever she was. I didn't know if she was alive or gone, and that not knowing hurt worse than anything else. That uncertainty settled deep in my bones. It became part of how I walked, how I spoke, how I saw the world. I began to think less like a child and more like someone who had survived something, though I couldn't yet say what. I learned how to listen without reacting, how to notice the shift in someone's tone before their words turned cruel. I became good at reading the air, sensing danger before it arrived. It's strange how a child can become so sharp when love is taken from him. I watched the way the grown folk moved, how their faces changed when they were near the white folks, how their backs bent lower, how their voices softened, how they swallowed whole parts of themselves just to survive. I didn't understand why back then, but I imitated them anyway. I became quiet, obedient, useful. That's what they wanted, not joy, not curiosity, just usefulness. They said I was a good boy, but inside, I was breaking, not loudly, quietly, in the kind of way you don't notice until it's too late. I started to see how deep the chains ran, not just around our wrists or ankles, but in our minds, in the way we saw ourselves. I remember once hearing one of the older men say, "We ain't got no past, boy, just a present we didn't ask for." That stayed with me. It explained why no one told stories, why no one spoke of where they came from, who they loved, what their real names were. Our past had been taken, like my mother, and buried in silence. All we had was the now, and even that was borrowed. The older I got, the more I realized how much had been stolen from us. Not just freedom, but family, dignity, memory, and it wasn't just the cruelty of whips or labor, it was the quiet way they stripped us of belonging. They wanted us to forget we were human, but I never forgot her. Even as the image of her face faded, even as the years stacked like stones on my back, I never let go of the ache she left behind. That ache became my proof, my protest, my prayer. I carried it with me in every silent hour, every forced smile, every time I bit my tongue to keep the peace. That pain, quiet as it was, kept me real, kept me me. They taught us to answer when called, even if the name wasn't ours, to bow our heads, to keep our eyes down. But deep inside, I kept looking up, looking for her, for the woman who sang to me once under a cracked wooden ceiling, who held my small hand in hers, who looked at me that last time like she wanted to hold the world still. I didn't understand back then, but now I know. Growing up without her didn't just mean losing a mother. It meant losing the one person who saw me as something more than what they told me I was. And without her gaze to remind me, I had to learn to see myself through the shadows and believe I was still worthy of being seen. Years passed, and still I found myself straining to remember the sound of her voice. It wasn't just the absence that haunted me, it was the fear of forgetting. Memory, I came to learn, is a fragile thing, especially when sorrow and time press down on it like weight on the wooden beam. At night, when the world quieted and my body ached from labor, I would lie in the darkness and try to bring her back through sound alone. I'd hum little bits of melody, scraps of lullabies, hoping that somewhere in the folds of my mind I'd find her again. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'd hear it not through my ears, but inside my chest, that soft tune she used to hum. when braiding my hair, or the way she called my name like it had meaning, like it mattered. The way she used to whisper, "You're my boy," with a warmth no one else ever gave me. I clung to those echoes like lifelines, even when I couldn't be sure if they were real or something I invented just to survive. I didn't speak of her to anyone, not because I didn't want to, but because no one asked. And in that world, silence was safer than truth. But I carried her with me every day. In the way I folded a cloth with care, the way I offered a kind word to a child, the way I looked up at the stars at night and tried to imagine if she could see them too, wherever she was. Sometimes I'd sit by myself, far from the others, and hum the songs I thought she might have known, and even if I got them wrong, they made me feel closer to her. In those moments, I wasn't just a field hand. I wasn't just property. I was a son, a boy who once had a mother who loved him. One of the older women noticed once. She passed by, me humming under my breath, and paused. She looked at me and asked softly, "Who taught you that tune?" And I said, "My mama." She didn't ask anything more. She just nodded, like she understood that some things are too sacred to dig into. After that, I kept humming, even when no one could hear. It was the only way I knew to keep her alive. Her voice, or what was left of it in me, became my anchor. When they shouted at me or called me by a name that wasn't mine, I would retreat inward to the sound of her voice. When my body bled or broke, I'd hear her say, "You're strong, baby. You hold on." I don't know if she ever said those words out loud, but I needed them, and so I let myself believe she had. That voice became my sanctuary, a soft place in a world of sharp edges. I started to understand the power of memory, not just as a way to look back, but as a way to survive forward. When you're denied your past, memory becomes rebellion. It becomes a way to say, "I was loved once. I belonged to someone. I mattered." They could strip away our names, our language, our families, but if I could hold on to her voice, they couldn't take everything. It reminded me that I came from someone who saw me as human, before the world tried to convince me otherwise. There were nights when I dreamt of her standing at the edge of a field, her arms open, calling to me in that same old voice. I'd run to her, and just before I reached her, I'd wake up. I hated those dreams, and yet I craved them, because in them, I got to hear her again, even if it was only for a moment. As I grew older, that voice began to change. It wasn't as clear. It grew distant. Some days I couldn't recall it at all, and I'd panic, afraid I'd lost her for good. But then, in the smallest things, a breeze, a scent, a note in the song, I'd feel her again. She was in me, not just as a memory, but as a way of being, a quiet strength, a softness the world tried to beat out of me, but never could. I carried her voice through every season, every storm, every loss. It made me kind when I had every reason to be cruel. It made me patient when life was anything but. And though the years hardened me, though my back bent and my hands callous, that voice kept a piece of me soft, human, whole. Now, all these years later, when I close my eyes and think of who I am, I don't see a man bent by time or labor. I see a boy sitting at his mother's feet, listening to a song meant just for him. And that memory, that whisper, it's all I have, but it's enough to remind me that I came from love, even if the world tried to bury it. If you've made it this far, and you feel the weight of what I've shared, please subscribe so her voice, through mine, can keep on living. There's something about silence that changes a person, not the peaceful kind, not the silence of a still morning or the hush of nightfall, no. I mean the kind of silence that settles in after loss. The kind that creeps into your chest and wraps itself around your ribs until it feels like breathing is too loud. After my mother was taken, that silence became part of me. It followed me into the fields, into the nights, into the smallest corners of my heart. I stopped asking questions. I stopped crying where anyone could hear. I became quiet in the way a tree becomes still before a storm, waiting, bracing, listening for something it cannot stop. But there was one thing I never stopped holding onto: the way she looked at me. In those final seconds, that look, God, that look has never left me. It spoke more than any words could have. It was as if she was telling me something without saying it, like she was planting a seed in me that I wouldn't understand until I was older. There was pain in her eyes, yes, but also defiance. Love, yes, but also a warning. She wasn't just saying goodbye. She was passing something on to me, a duty, a fire, a quiet command to endure, to keep breathing, to keep being even when it hurt. I didn't know it then, but I came to understand it slowly, in pieces, over the long hard years. Her eyes told me, they can take me, they can break the world around you, but don't let them take what's inside you. And so I didn't. I couldn't. I carried that look like a torch through the darkest parts of my life. When others bowed their heads, I kept mine low too, but inside, I remembered when the lashes fell on backs that didn't deserve them, and I had to bite my tongue to keep my screams inside. I remembered when I saw children separated from mothers, the same way I had been, and all I could offer was a look. I made sure it was a look that said, I see you, you matter, because that's what she gave me, a way to see myself when everything else tried to erase me. I began to understand that silence, too, could be powerful. It wasn't always weakness. Sometimes it was the only way we had to resist. A quiet refusal to forget, a quiet vow to survive. I became a watcher. I watched the world move around me, watched how people changed under pressure, how some gave in and others held on. And I learned to recognize the ones who, like me, carried something unspoken inside them, some small ember that hadn't gone out. We didn't have to speak to recognize each other, a glance, a nod, the way someone stood when they were told to kneel. That was enough. I found myself offering strength to others, not through words, but through presence, a hand steadying another, a shared song hummed under breath, a moment of stillness in a world that demanded constant submission. My mother had given me the blueprint, not with instructions, but with her eyes. She showed me that strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it looked like surviving when everything told you not to. Sometimes it looked like kindness when all you knew was pain. Sometimes it was just holding your head up long enough to see the sun rise one more time. I saw so many broken people, Jackson, so many who couldn't carry what they were forced to bear. And I don't blame them. This world tried its best to crush every soft part of us. But I held on to that softness like a secret, because in it was her, and in her was the reason I kept going. I remember one day, I saw a young girl taken from her father. She screamed and kicked, and he was held back, unable to reach her. As they dragged her away, his eyes met mine, and in that second, I gave him the same look my mother gave me, not because it would fix anything, but because I knew what it meant to need that look, that silent acknowledgement of your pain. I never learned to fight with fists or words. I never had the chance, but I learned to fight with memory, with compassion, with endurance. I didn't have a sword, but I had her eyes in mine, and that, in a way, became enough. There were times I wanted to let go, times I thought the pain of remembering was too great, but forgetting her felt like killing her all over again, and I couldn't do that. I wouldn't, so I walked through life with her gaze stitched into the back, of my mind. Whenever I faced something cruel or unjust, I'd see her there, watching me, not judging, not even guiding, but witnessing. And that made me want to be better, kinder, stronger. Her strength became mine. Her silence became my language. I learned to speak through stillness, to resist without shouting, because sometimes, in a world built to destroy you, simply surviving with your heart intact is the loudest rebellion of all. I don't know what became of her. I've stopped asking the stars for answers, but I do know this. Whatever I am now, whatever part of me still believes in dignity, in gentleness, in the power of remembering, it's because of her. And even if time has worn down her face in my mind, her eyes remain clear, and they still tell me what they told me that day. Don't let them take what's inside you, asterisk. I was born with a name my mother whispered into my ear when the world was quiet. I don't remember how it sounded exactly, but I know it felt warm like a blanket wrapped around my chest. She said it was mine, said it came from her grandmother, and hers before that, a name passed down like fire in cold hands. But in the world I was born into, that name was never written down. It wasn't in any records, wasn't spoken in public. It lived only in our mouths, in the soft hush of trust. Between mother and child, when they took her, they took that too. After that day, I was no longer called by the name she gave me. I was given a new one ashore, sharp sound that didn't belong to me, that didn't carry her voice or our people or anything true. It was a name they chose for their convenience, not for my identity. A name that stripped me down to function, to obedience. I was too young to understand what was happening at the time, but something inside me resisted. I didn't know why, but I hated the way it sounded when they called it out. It felt like a bruise every time I had to answer to it, but I did answer. We all did, because silence meant punishment, and survival meant surrendering things you didn't want to let go of. That's how they got to us, not always with force, but with repetition. They said the name over and over until it started to shape how I saw myself. I stopped thinking about the one she gave me. It faded like a dream you forget by midday. Years passed. I worked, I obeyed, I endured, and all the while, I wore that name like a collar. It wasn't mine, but it followed me everywhere. The others had the same story. Names they never chose. Names that weren't born from love or heritage, but handed down by men who wanted to own us. You'd see someone your age, someone who once had a name full of soul and song, being called something hollow, something foreign to their tongue, and you'd watch them shrink just a little each time they heard it. We all shrunk in our own ways. I remember one man who used to whisper his African name before bed. He didn't say much to anyone, but every night I'd hear him repeat those syllables like a prayer, even though no one else knew what they meant. I asked him once why he did it. He said, because I refuse to be forgotten, even if I'm the only one who remembers me. That stayed with me. For years I didn't speak my real name, not even in my thoughts. It felt dangerous, like touching a wound that hadn't healed. But as I got older, something changed. I began to feel angry, not the kind that boils over, but the slow burning kind, the one that builds in your chest like a storm waiting to break. I realized they hadn't just taken my freedom or my family. They had tried to erase my story, and I had let them. That's when I started to ask the old ones, the few who still remembered the early days. Some shook their heads, memory too far gone. Others would close their eyes and try to recall. Bits and pieces came back, a sound, a rhythm, a meaning. And then, one day, an old woman looked at me and said, I remember what your mama called you. My heart stopped. She said it gently, like it was a fragile thing. She spoke my name, not the one they gave me, but the one I hadn't heard in decades. It didn't sound like much, but to me, it was like hearing sunlight. I didn't say anything right away. I just let it echo inside me, roll through the hollow places. I said it back to her, quietly. It felt strange at first, like putting on an old shirt you thought you lost. But the more I said it, the more it fit, the more I felt whole. From that day on, I carried that name in secret again, not because I was ashamed, but because I needed to rebuild it slowly, to let it grow strong again inside me. I would whisper it to myself in the fields. I would hum it under my breath like a song, and eventually, I stopped answering to the other one. Not out loud. I still had to survive. But inside me, I was no longer who they called. I was who my mother named. That name became my resistance, my reminder, my truth. And when freedom finally came, if you could call it that, I stood in the open air and spoke it aloud. Again, for the first time in years, I said my real name under the sky, and the sound of it made my knees shake. It felt like calling a lost child home, like waking up after a long, hard sleep. They say names don't matter, that they're just words, but I know better. A name is your beginning, your anchor, the sound that ties you to your people, to your history. It is what you carry when everything else is stripped away. So when I reclaimed mine, I wasn't just honoring her, I was honoring every soul who never got to speak theirs again. I wear it now, not on paper, not for others to see, but in the way I move through the world, in the way I speak, the way I remember, the way I tell this story. Because no matter what they called me, I was never theirs. And now, even if it took a lifetime, I'm mine again. They say freedom came one day, just like that, as if all the chains snapped at once and the sun rose different. But for me, it wasn't like that. It didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like a question no one could answer. I remember the whispers that started to move through the quarters. Some said soldiers were coming. Others said papers had been signed far away by men who didn't know our names. Some cried. Some didn't believe it. I stood under a tree, looking out at the same fields I had worked since I was a boy, and I wondered what it meant to be free when all you'd ever known was someone else's rule. The overseers left, but the land didn't change. The sun still beat down the same. My back still ached, my stomach still growled. No one handed us anything. There were no welcome signs, no new homes, no money, no maps, just an open road and questions in every direction. Where do we go? Who are we now? What does a man do with freedom when the world has already taken everything from him? I didn't have answers. I only had my feet, my name, and the pieces of memory I'd managed to hold onto. I walked away from that place, slow and quiet, not because I wasn't happy to leave it behind, but because part of me didn't believe it was real. I'd seen men beaten for less than trying to walk free. I half expected someone to come running, shouting, dragging me back, but no one did. The silence was the strangest part. No celebration, no song, just the soft sound of feet on dirt and hearts trying to catch up to what the moment meant. I didn't go far at first. I stayed close to familiar trees, familiar paths. I hoped maybe I'd find anyone who knew where my mother had gone all those years ago. But there was no sign of her, no word. It was like she'd been swallowed whole by time. And in that way, freedom was bitter, because now I was free to look and free to never find her. I wandered for a while, doing odd jobs, sleeping under trees, eating whatever someone was kind enough to share. Some folks started new lives, married, built cabins, raised children who would never know the sound of chains, and I was glad for that. I was glad for them. But inside, I carried a heaviness I didn't know how to put down. Freedom didn't undo the years. It didn't erase the beatings, the hunger, the names we were forced to answer to. It didn't bring back the mothers, or the brothers, or the children who were sold or buried without a name. It didn't fill the hole in my chest where her voice used to live. And maybe that's what no one tells you. Freedom is just a door. You still have to walk through it. Still have to decide who you are on the other side. And if you've been told your whole life that you're nothing, it takes time to believe you're something. I saw good men struggle. Some turned angry, bitter. Some drank too much or wandered too far. Others tried to be invisible again, as if freedom was too heavy to carry. I didn't blame them. We had been broken in ways no one could see, and no one came to put us back together. I kept moving. I found small places to stay. I helped where I could. I fixed fences, chopped wood, helped plant crops on other people's land at once, held the blood of my people, now growing food for families that had never known chains. I tried not to let it eat me alive. I tried to find purpose and work, in small acts of kindness, in quiet resistance. I read when someone was kind enough to teach me. I listened more than I spoke, and when I could, I shared pieces of my story now, because I like to talk about it, but because I knew that silence had been used against us too long. I saw young ones growing up free, walking taller, speaking louder, and that gave me some peace. Not much, but enough, still. There were nights when I lay under the stars and felt more lost than ever, because freedom without direction is a kind of wandering, a kind of ache. I had lived my whole life being told what to do, where to be, how to survive. Now that I had choices, I didn't know what to choose. I didn't even know what I wanted. I wanted her. I wanted the past back. I wanted the boy I used to be, the one who still believed she'd come home. But the past was gone, and all I could do was carry it with me every wound, every song, every silence. Freedom didn't heal me, but it gave me space to hurt out loud. And that, in itself, was something. It allowed me to cry without hiding, to say her name out loud without fear, to sit with other men who had lost like I had and share stories under the moon. I began to write some of it down, or ask others to write for me, so that it wouldn't all disappear when I did, because what we survived shouldn't vanish with. U.S. It should be remembered. It should matter. Freedom didn't bring peace, but it brought voice. And with that voice, I started to rebuild myself not as someone whole, but as someone honest. Someone who could finally say, this is what happened to me, and not be silenced. That was the beginning of peace, not the kind that makes everything better, but the kind that lets you breathe without shame. The kind that lets you say, even if the world tried to erase me, I'm still here. All these years, through every shadow and every storm, I have carried her eyes with me. They are not just a memory, they are a compass, guiding me through the darkest nights and the loneliest days. When I feel lost, when the weight of the world presses down like a stone on my chest, I close my eyes and see her looking back at me, steady and unyielding. It is in that look that I find the strength to stand, to keep moving, to keep believing that even in the broken pieces of my life, there is still something whole. I have learned that pain can shape you, but it doesn't have to define you. The scars I bear are not just wounds, they are stories, each one a testament to survival, to love, to a spirit that no one could break. I tell this story not for pity or for sorrow, but so that her legacy lives on, so that her love, her sacrifice, and her courage are never forgotten. To the young ones who listen, to those who carry their own wounds in silence, I say this: you are not alone. The road is hard, the nights are long, but there is a light that can never be extinguished. It burns quietly in the heart of those who refuse to give up, who remember where they came from, and who dream of a better tomorrow. This story is mine, but it is also yours now. Keep it safe, share it gently, and never let it fade, because as long as her eyes guide me, I know I am never truly lost. I thank you for listening to the silence, to the sorrow, to the strength. If you feel this story in your bones, I hope you'll stay with us. Keep her memory alive by walking this path together. Subscribe, not just for me, but for the countless voices waiting to be heard. And when you're ready, keep listening. The story doesn't end here.